Hello, everybody. Hello, friends of American writers and our guests, our honored guests from Columbia College. We're glad you can all be here today in this virtual way. Last month, we honored our award-winning writers. And this month, we're doing the other half of our mission, which is to present scholarships to promising young MFA students, or student in this case. So we're very honored to have with us today Annella Thomas, our scholarship recipient, her sponsor, Lisa Fishman, and our speaker, Patricia Ann Mcnair, who's been on the faculty of Columbia College in the creative writing department for a very long time. She was also a student there, and she's also written several books of essays and short stories. So we'll be hearing from all of them today. But our first speaker will be Edie. Edie, I'm blanking on your last name.
Riley.
Edie Riley, of course. It's been a morning. Edie Riley, who is the chair of our foundation. She will be explaining the work that it does. Thank you.
Okay. Today, we are celebrating the mission of FAW to encourage new talented writers associated with the Midwest. Part of this mission is awarding scholarships to promising graduate students in colleges in the Chicago area. This is the job of the Foundation Committee, and I'd like to explain a bit how it started and what we do. The Foundation Fund Committee began in 1984 with a grant from FAW's Treasury. This money was first invested in savings accounts, and then the interest was used for their projects. The first project was a writer's workshop at University of Illinois in Chicago. This was a 2-day workshop that was conducted by a noted writer. The first writer in this workshop was William Gass. This continued for several years, was a popular program, and then it also went to Roosevelt University, where it continued until 1998, when it was decided to offer scholarships, which is what we are still doing today. Our funds are now in an account at Merrill Lynch, managed by Lou Farr, and he is working on a pro bono basis. We also have augmented the fund with gifts from FAW members and their friends. The interest from this allows us to offer our scholarships. And today we will be awarding a scholarship of $3,000 to a graduate student at Columbia College, Chicago. I would like to introduce her sponsor, Lisa Fishman, who will then introduce Annella. Thank you.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here and to learn more about your remarkable organization. It really is an honor for us to be here with you. We are grateful. And it is a great pleasure to introduce Annella Thomas, who is in her second year of our MFA program in nonfiction. I first met Annella in the very final semester of her completion of our BA in creative writing poetry. I confess I have not worked with Annella on her nonfiction. She was part of a small group in our capstone course, the Poetry Thesis Seminar. And I want to tell you the 2 ways in which Annella stood out immediately to me. First, before I saw any of the students' work, because of her quietness. Now, this is no ordinary quietness, but a rare form of intensely engaged, deeply attentive, thoughtful, active quietness. If any of you are teachers, you'll know what I mean and how rare it is. Then, as soon as everyone wrote something, probably an in-class writing on the first day that we heard aloud, the phenomenal talent of Annella was immediately evident. She has the born writer's instinctive awareness of the power of specificity and detail, the concrete particulars, as we say. Even more importantly, she has the patience to actually write with precision and with perceptiveness. And let's face it, it can seem more exciting to write the big picture stuff or to make grand, dazzling claims. But it takes what my grandmother would call elbow grease to make it vivid, resonant, and to sound as if it could only have been perceived and articulated by that one authentic voice, the one idiosyncratic sensibility of the writers. That takes both candor and diligence, and young writers may tend to have a bit more of one than the other. Speaking of diligence, I will also tell you that Annella carried a 4.0 average as an undergraduate and continues to hold that GPA as a graduate student. She is scholarly and supremely conscientious as a student. Those traits feed her creative writing. Annella lives with her family in University Park, Illinois, and she was formed and supported as a writer by her family, especially, I believe, by her mother, who, as Annella astutely described, is a huge fan of stationery. That is, paper for writing on, for paper and notebooks and Post-its and writing and books and reading and libraries. In other words, it became clear in my conversation with Annella last week that the writing life, or what the great novelist Iris Murdoch called living on paper, is a gift that Annella partly absorbed from her mother's love of paper. And I believe that that infuses the giftedness of her writing in mysterious, ineffable ways. Thank you so much for your support of this deeply dedicated young American writer who will continue to learn and to write. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for this award. It was very unexpected, but so appreciated. With this, along with like my instructors like Lisa and Patty and the rest of Columbia, you all have been so encouraging of my work and my ability to succeed. And even though there were times where I doubted it, you always stuck by me. So I am and always will be thankful for your constant care and support. So I'm going to go ahead and begin reading a recent piece that I've been working on titled Define Honey or How It Feels. My skin has not been feeling well lately. I have been developing severe bouts of dry skin peeling and bleeding and scabbing along my jawlines. No amount of cream, powdered oats, organic oils, or serums filled with hyaluronic acid or propolis would fix it. Just looking at my face in the mirror gave me fatigue. Feeling that textured skin, reminding me of my teen face once covered in inflamed blemishes and dark stains the size of rabbit shit scattered about, like the ones in my family's backyard. But then I thought of honey. Many years ago in the high school auditorium, you like someone, don't you? My friend and I was having a break after school from technical theater club. She was always starving for gossip and potential matchmaking possibilities. Don't you? Yeah. Who? Tell me. You know, girls fall in love too easily. What? That's what my mom says. Remember Lip Smacker and their various intensely fruity colored smelling flavors you always eyeballed with desire at every store they were sold? Remember wanting the strawberry and cherry and raspberry and just any berry flavored one they had, and a bit of watermelon too, because why not? You wanted every edition, especially when they partnered with Starburst and Skittles. You thought you were going to die of acute sugary overload. Remember when your mom bought you instead a cheap God knows what brand lip gloss from your local beauty supply store? How you sort of wanted it initially as its pinkish red plastic packaging allured you, but wasn't 100% sure mom would let you get it because you were barely in the second grade yet. But she noticed how many times you passed by it, how many times you picked it up and rolled it between your thumb and index finger. So she bought it, but on one condition. You can wear it at home, but don't ever wear it out, especially at school. You sort of listened. You sort of didn't like how wet it felt when the solid plastic ball rolled across your lips. But in the mirror, that gloss, that shine showed you could be those girls in the lip smacker ads, or the girls posed in those Target and Toys R Us catalogs. You could be your ma in the way she gently applied layer after layer of her iconic red lipstick before leaving for work. How quickly this woman became a woman in your eyes. How bold, how tempting, how dangerous. Remember going to school with the gloss in your pocket. Remember how prepared you were to put it on secretly whilst putting your things away in your locker, looking into the magnetized mirror your mother gave you. Prepared to become a woman, or at least what a woman ought to look like. Bold, tempting, dangerous. I often taste honey through Ma's cooking, particularly when she cooks a ham. A sugary taste that lingers in every part of my mouth, sprouting and releasing like dandelions. Ma would squeeze an entire 12-ounce bottle into a thawed ham for Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, always buying 2 or 3 hams per holiday due to a sale in our stomachs. Before she put on the honey, she would rinse the ham and stab it an inch deep a couple of times for the ingredients to seep into. Next, she would drizzle the honey along its body, it slowly flowing down like glue into the pan, and my fingers began to twitch, eager to dance them across it as I watched from the side of the stove. Then she'd pour loads of brown sugar and massage them roughly in, making sure her fingers glided through every available crevice, causing the sugar and honey to melt into tiny darkened clumps. Finally, with the oven already warmed to 325, she places 2 or 3 sheets of aluminum foil over it before putting it into the oven, sealing that goodness to roast for approximately 3 to 4 hours. And that's how I cook my hams, she'd say. And I would skip around the house excited, smelling, drooling, heeding for a taste of that honeyed ham. Many months ago, outside on the street, a guy approached me while I was walking my beagle Daisy. He was a stranger, but also my neighbor, as he lived just a few houses down from me and my parents. Would you like to talk sometime? Exchange numbers? I remember thinking I couldn't because he was a stranger and my neighbor, but how nice he seemed. But what about COVID? And my parents living right down the street? And him again? And if not here, where else? I remember looking down at the wild purple flowers beginning to emerge and wanting to pick them and rub and spread and print them across my breast as if they could hold the scent of lavenders. I'm sorry, but no thank you, I answered, knowing I couldn't hide it and keep quiet. Do you know white, black don't crack? Ma was applying her skincare products half naked on her bed early in the morning, getting ready for work. Why? Because we moisturize. And I knew this already just from my own comprehensive research into obtaining flawless skin. How to rid acne, how often to exfoliate, physical versus chemical exfoliation, how to fade dark spots, hyperpigmentation, hydroquinone or vitamin C, luxury versus drugstore, difference between treatments and serums, what's the 10-step Korean skincare routine, what's an essence, are essential oils good for the skin, what are the best essential oils for the skin, best seed oils, rosehip or jojoba, best for oily acne-prone skin, where to find them, Amazon, Whole Foods. You really don't need serums or those anti-aging products if you just keep your face moisturized. Honey as a cleanser or a mask helps to nurture and soothe the skin with its anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties, making it suitable for sensitive and acne-prone skin. It is also very moisturizing due to the high concentration of sugar the bees mix with just a little water. With this, it can be used on dry, flaky skin to help retain moisture coming from the air. A year ago, I tested this by using it to cleanse my face for a whole week and not follow up with anything else, leaving my skin to develop its own natural oils as a moisturizer. The results were relatively mild with fewer bumps and my skin less oily than before. But what I loved most about the experience was a total downsizing of my skincare routine. No toners, no serums, no acne treatments, no sheet masks, no moisturizers, no complications, no confusion of what comes first or before or to use what in what part of my face at what time of day. Just massage, just rinse, just honey was enough. The name of the lipstick was Name Drop. Toxic was your first utterance as you slowly twirled the stick from its white matte engraved shell. a luscious red, glossy, creamy, and clean, and your lips were going to devour every pigment like Marilyn or Selena. You're growing up, you thought. And you giggled, smiled nervously into the mirror as if you were going to be launched into space or pushed into a pool of lava, or a house from Kansas was going to drop on your head instantly upon application. You always think the worst, you thought. Yet you wanted to see for yourself what you as a woman could look like, what being beautiful and Black really meant, and how such words could even coexist in the same sentence. Can you see yourself in either of those words? Can you see yourself being loved? Can you see yourself deserving such gentleness, such care, such patience and understanding? Growing up, you always thought the worst. You applied the lipstick layer after layer as Ma would do, patiently tracing the lines of your lips, ensuring every crevice was filled. Once done, you stared at your reflection with the fresh weave and fruity colored bobby pins, the just moist enough skin and the taut red smothering your lips. Never think the worst of yourself ever again, you said, but then quickly wiped it all off as if it was never meant to be there. Last night, you came to mind, reminding me when looking for clothes to wear I know you'll never see me in, or when I'm trying to focus in class, I'm wondering what you're doing now with her other than marrying her. The room suddenly grows colder and tighter, making my entire body go raw. Now when I see couples holding hands, my palms feel with pressure as if you were holding them. Now when I see couples hugging each other, my stomach presses in so far until ribs show, as if you prefer me this way. Now when I see couples kissing, my lips tingle until numb, as if your teeth were peeling away each strip of skin. These days, it seems like I'm only concerned for your safety instead of my own, as if the world would be better if you stayed in it and let me leave it behind. So even if you don't think of me, and I know you don't, and whether you only remember a face or just a name, and you're with her or someone else, be it friends or family, and I'll be jealous either way, at least someone can see you. She and your mother can see you face to face and tell you I love you and you're enough. Now I realize Ma could have meant differently about keeping my skin moisturized. Maybe she meant to keep it simple. Keep yourself simple, sensible, uncomplicated, and straightforward. Don't overthink your Blackness or else it'll crack you wide open. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, this is the first time that we have ever actually had a student read from her work, and I think we'll continue this new tradition. Your essay made me sometimes hungry, often desiring to run to the kitchen to get a jar of honey and see what happens if I put it on my face and my hands and so on, and brought back a lot of memories of what it's like to be a young woman, although it's the distance for me at least is quite a while. So thank you so much. That was lovely. Okay, so today's speaker, who I'm proud to introduce, is a real powerhouse. And I know this because I was in graduate school with her. But I took her biography from her website to make sure that I got things right. So Patricia Ann Mcnair has lived 98% of her life in the Midwest. She's managed a gas station, sold pots and pans door to door, tended bar, breaded mushrooms, worked on the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and taught aerobics. Today, she is an associate professor in the English and Creative Writing Department of Columbia College Chicago, where she received the Excellence in Teaching Award, as well as a nomination for the Carnegie Foundation's U.S. Professor of the Year. Just as an aside, I can attest to watching Patricia give an address or a paper at a conference. I don't remember the paper, but I do remember there were many students there. And when she finished, they stood up and cheered. So that's, well, you remember those things. Okay. So her newest book, Responsible Adults, is forthcoming in December. Her previous story collection, Temple of the Air, was a finalist for the Montaigne Medal, which is for the most thought-provoking book of, in this case, 2017. McNair's work has appeared in various anthologies, magazines, journals, including American Fiction, The Rumpus, The Good Men Project, Barrel House, The Nervous Breakdown, Superstition. You know, I'm not going to read them all because we want to hear from Patricia. So believe me, it's a very long list. She also writes reviews for the Washington Independent Review of Books. Her short story, My Mother's Daughter, won the Solstice Lit Mag Award for Fiction in 2014. She's also published in The Truth of the Matter, Art and Craft and Creative Nonfiction, edited by Dinty W. Moore. She's received numerous Illinois Arts Council awards and Pushcart Prize nominations in fiction and nonfiction. Today, she will share Confessions of a Creative Writing Teacher. Patty, we are so pleased to welcome you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tammy. It's great to see you. Thank you all for inviting me here to speak with you today. I'm a fan of this organization. I was lucky to be here a few years ago when one of my students, Jessica Love, was awarded one of your scholarships. That was back when you had the fancy dinners and the fancy luncheons and fancy places. And like you said earlier, Tammy, perhaps we'll all have a chance to meet that way again someday. But back then it became immediately clear to me that you all are engaged in loving and important work, and that you're supporting new and talented writers, just as your mission says, and fostering and promoting literature, and we all appreciate that. So confession, as Tammy Bob said, she and I were students together in our MFA studies a couple of years ago, not many, a few years ago. And I've always really admired her talent and thoughtful work. And here's another confession. When Tammy and I first talked about my speaking with you today, I was excited, I was eager, but I was sort of chill and relaxed about it. And then as the day came closer, I became even more excited, but much less chill and relaxed. A little afraid, frankly, maybe a lot afraid. And I'm wondering why that is. Maybe because what you're striving to do is so important to me, and which means by extension that you all are important to me. But also I think my fear was raised a little because of the title of this talk, Confessions of a Creative Writing Teacher. Confession, you know, sin, confession, exposure, confession, vulnerability, sort of an outing of oneself, of one's secrets. What am I really willing to confess? You can see why that might be a little terrifying, confessing to a room full of mostly strangers. But then I hear Annella and I hear Annella read, and I realize it's not going to be so bad after all, perhaps. When I started to study the idea of confessing and all of the implications and vulnerabilities that would bring, I realized that what you're asking me to do is not unlike what I hope my students are willing to do, to take that risk, not to be afraid to make mistakes, to say something that matters to them, to write until they figure it out. So that's what I decided to do in preparation for today's talk. I sat down with my journal, and here's a confession. I am a fierce journal keeper. I have been since I was a child, and I used to write my 2-line diary entries when I was 9, mostly about Michael Jackson and how much I loved him, or maybe about Mark Lester from the movie Oliver, how much I loved him. Anyway, I sat down a few weeks ago with my journal and started writing to figure out what I had to say that mattered to me and that I might share with you all. So what came of this was a sort of a list of confessions from my time as a student and my time as a teacher and my time as a writer, and often all of these things at once, which is where I believe I am right now, a student, a teacher, and a writer. And this list has no particular order. Confession, I didn't want to be a writer. My family is full of writers. My dad was a newspaper guy. My mom was a travel writer. My half-brother wrote stories and a novel. My other half-brother's a poet. In fact, he was the poet laureate of Maine for some years. I was the rebel. I wanted to be an actor. Confession. It was when I came to Columbia College as a non-traditional undergraduate in my late 20s to study radio. And I took a required writing class. It was then that I began to understand that writing was indeed that thing that I wanted to do. That was why I wrote most days in my journals and diaries. That's why I made up stories and wrote them down, just because it was fun. My first short story was based on an assignment my mother gave me when I was a kid, maybe 5, 6. It was summer. I was bored. My brothers were at camp. Write about a cat with blue ears, she told me. And I did. When she came home from work, she read the story. She told me she loved it. And my writer self started to bloom. Confession. I have been teaching at Columbia College Chicago for more than 30 years now. I started as an adjunct. I became full-time in 1995. I got tenure in 2000. Confession. If the job I have right now at Columbia were to come up and I was the same person with the same qualifications as I had when I got my full-time job initially decades ago, I would not even get the interview. Qualifications have shifted. That I was a publishing writer and a respected teacher would not be enough. Like so many other places, Columbia has cleaved to the idea that you must have significant publications, meaning books by respected and known publishers, in order to teach. My first book wasn't published until 2010, 15 years after I got my full-time gig. I know a lot of published writers because we are a small community, even in a big, big world. I know a lot of writers who have significant publications, really fine publications, who cannot teach for shit. Confession, I swear too much. And in the wrong places sometimes, so I apologize if that offended anybody. I swear in front of my students sometimes. It usually makes them smile. Confession. Being a writer is a little anti-American dream. Writers rarely get rich off their work. The idea of success is something different for us than it is for others. We only want to be read. We only want people to tell us that they've read our work and that there's something in what we've done that speaks to them. Writers have a hard time even making a living off of their work. And so often we teach. And because writers are asked by new acquaintances if they have written anything the new acquaintances have read, it's hard for them. Okay, really, it's hard for me. I'm talking about myself here, making my own confession. It's hard for me to call myself a writer whenever I meet someone new. Hi, I'm Patty. I am a teacher. And just to give that a bit more gravitas, I would add a college teacher. Confession. Calling myself a teacher first, primarily for so many years, has affected the way I work. If I think of myself as a teacher first, then it is the teaching that takes priority over everything. My day-to-day, my writing. Dishes don't get done because I have pages and pages of student work to read. Sometimes I have to pass up my work, my own workout. Too often, much too often. I sit down with the writing of my students instead of my own writing. Because that's what I'm paid for, after all, teaching. I have to remind myself that I am paid for this, though, too, for being part of the literary community, for reading books, for writing books. My tenure, my rank, my merit raises depend on this. Teaching, community and college service, professional development, publishing. It can be exhausting. Confession, it is exhausting. Confession, I didn't start to really call myself a writer until I was awarded a scholarship to the Vermont Studio Center. Scholarships are so important, and I so appreciate your sharing them with our students. But I was awarded a scholarship to the Vermont Studio Center, which is an artist residency in Vermont, obviously. There, the community of residents were one of two things. You were an artist or you were a writer. Whenever we met anyone new, whenever I met anyone new, like when I met my husband there, but that's another confession for a different talk. Whenever they asked what you did, you had two choices. I am an artist, or I am an see, I can't even say it now, or I am a writer. Saying that over and over again for a month, and confession, it wasn't that easy at first. Clearly it's not that easy still, but saying it over and over made me finally believe that. I am a writer. I am a writer. I am a writer. Confession, even though I am a writer, I have published 2.5 books in the last 10 years. I say half because my third, as Tammy Bob said, will be released in just a little over a month from now. I still have a difficult time writing while I'm teaching. In fact, being immersed in my student writing, no matter how good it is, often makes my own work, when I have the time to sit down with it, a little less good. I can't explain why that is. Reading my students' work and talking with them about the work that they're doing and the work that we're sharing makes me want to write, but for whatever reason, it doesn't make me a better writer, at least not while I'm doing that, while I'm teaching. Confession. Annella Thomas, your scholarship winner, was a student of mine early on in her undergraduate career at Columbia College. She was in my foundations and creative writing class. In class, she was a little quiet, just as Lisa said, but even then, the work she was conceiving and making gave me and the other students great pleasure to read. She has an interesting mind, and the way she digs into the material she's writing is fascinating. You heard it yourself just now. A few years after this, last year, in fact, Annella was in my graduate nonfiction workshop. And man, oh man, had her work grown and emerged and become something full of intelligence, of vulnerability, sometimes of confession, coincidentally. And we, those in the workshop, her peers, me, we couldn't wait to read more of it. Confession. This is one of the perks of being a creative writing teacher. Watching your students grow, take command of their material, take risks with their work, write to discover, watching them do all of those things. Because good students understand this. They understand that writing is not so much about having their say, about speaking their truths, but it's more about figuring things out, about willing to ask questions that might only be answered with more questions, about following those tangents, about putting it down, about getting it written. As James Thurber says, don't get it right, get it written. Confession. I expect great things from Annella and her work. I really do, Annella. I can't wait to see what you do next. Confession. My students are often more successful at this writing thing than I am, and that's a scary thing. You can see it often in the early work they do. I've been a teacher to a bunch of writers at Columbia and in the community because I do teach a lot of community workshops for adults and young people. People you have probably heard of have been my students, writers you probably know. Some you've honored in your own work as Friends of American Writers. Michelle Pretorius, Julia Fine, Joe Mino, Megan Steelstra, Sin Vargas, Christine Mall Rice, Sahar Mustafa. Some you may not yet have heard of, but certainly will. R.J. Hoffman, Rebecca Cara, Faisal Muhyiddin, Annella Thomas. Behind me here, this is a pile of books written by some of my past students. And this is just a sampling of some of the books that they've written. Because since the pandemic, I've not been in my office on campus. That's where I keep most of my books, and I miss them. Confession. The pandemic has been both a good and a bad thing for teaching writing, at least in my mind. I mentioned that I teach a lot of community workshops. These past months, I've taught for Shake Rag Alley in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, for the Connecticut Literary Festival. I have future remote gigs for writers groups in the suburbs, a university in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, another talk in Galena, Illinois. My students in these groups, mostly adult students of a wide variety of ages and experiences, have joined in our workshops from their homes in the Midwest, in the East, in places like Idaho, and Oregon, and Seattle, and Nevada. That part's pretty good. I have students at Columbia now who can't be on campus, who are living in China, and one in Kurdistan, and one who's coming in from Africa because she can do it remotely. Gives us a vast and gathered community, which is a good thing for our working together. For my college classes, though, I can't fully say yet how this teaching and learning online is going to affect what comes from it. You know, there is a certain intimacy that can happen in remote learning. We see one another's home spaces, often with our pets in our laps, drinking from our favorite mugs. But the days of the week blur for me now, as they probably do for all of you as well. I'm often conferring with students on weekends, answering emails, Saturdays and Sundays. I feel as though I am on the clock all the time. And because we don't know what will happen to our future, to our collective health, I think it's important for us to know how to work like this and connect in this way. But Zoom fatigue is real. I didn't want to believe it. I especially didn't want to believe it because I knew I would be teaching remotely quite a number of students. But it is real, and perhaps especially for students who are on Zoom for 3 or 5 classes a week. I can see it in their eyes. I can see it in their slouch. They might be able to see it in mine. And something odd happens to our sense of audience when we work this way. Even now, I find myself continuing to look down at the corners where I can see some faces, and I don't know if you can see me or not. This idea of audience, which is an essential part of creative writing to my mind, we can't really hold someone's eye as we read to them or as we tell them our stories. And because of the nature of this and the distraction that surrounds us in our homes, we're not always able to hold someone's attention. The spontaneity of an audience in a classroom is gone from this. It really is gone from this as we learn in this way. My best and my less than best students, they keep their phones close by. I know it, I can tell. This is something I'd never allow in an in-person class. Hell, I keep my phone close by because my students often fall off their connection. They often reach out to me mid-class in texts and in chat. My best and less than best students sometimes mistakenly send their private notes and chats meant for other students to me. So I know that they're not fully engaged in our work at hand. You know, and that makes me sad. I could be tougher, probably. I could call them out for these transgressions in front of their classmates. But the thing is, we're all a little broken now, vulnerable more so than normal. We're just trying to make it through. And more than anything, I want my students to survive this. They don't have to write their way through it, but I want them to survive it so they can write their way past it, write their way after it. So one of the things that can work relatively well in this mode of teaching, this delivery of teaching, is the traditional writer's workshop model. You know, the Iowa model, the one where students pass their work out to one another. We talk about it as a group. We send notes to one another. This works especially well for advanced writing students. They know how to read. They know a lot about writing. They know how to talk about it thoughtfully and thoroughly and graciously and kindly, but also tough, firmly. Working online in this way allows them to think about their response to one another's work a few times and in a few ways. They get to deliver it in a few ways. They think about it when they write their notes in the first place. They think about it again when they talk about their notes. And then they think about it once more when they forward their notes to the writer whose work they're considering. Confession, I don't much believe in the Iowa workshop model as the best way to teach students writing. When I was going to be spending a few weeks in Paris, when my husband would be teaching an American Writers in Paris course, I took a French class. I knew no French, none. I said garage that way as opposed to garage, so maybe I knew that word, I don't know. My fellow students in this beginning level class didn't know much or any either. But our instructor would often tell us to speak with one another, to talk in French together. But you know, they didn't know French. I didn't know French. Like I've said, we really had nothing to teach one another. To my mind, that traditional workshop can be a little like that, especially with new students, students who haven't had a lot of practice making work, much less talking about work, especially at these beginning levels. I really prefer to teach students how to read as writers, how to experiment, how to make work, how to try things. So often that workshop method can be turned into a corrective thing, and students are often inclined to try to fix one another's broken stories, often in the image they imagine for it, less so in the image the students imagine for it themselves. Remember that toddlers learn how to break things first. They learn how to pull things out of waste baskets, strew things around. They learn to talk by babbling initially. See, I'm eager for my students to babble in their own unique voices, their own unique ways, to strew things around, to make a mess until they find out what they are looking for. And once they've made their way through that, to fashion that into something. And then once they've done that and they start to understand their own work, then they can share it with others, smart others, well-read others, others who are doing what they're doing as well. Confession, like I said, I've been teaching for more than 30 years. And like I said, I'm a little exhausted. And sometimes, like in the middle of a pandemic with an upcoming frightening election in a country that seems unwilling to do the hard work to be better, unwilling to admit our own mistakes so far, to confess our own sins. Sometimes I wonder if any of this really matters. This writing thing, this teaching thing. I mean, who cares? And then this happens, this. A gathering of Friends of American Writers, a group of writers and readers whose mission is, quote, to encourage new talented writers associated with the Midwest and to promote the arts, especially literature, among our members. And I remember that that should be my mission too, as a teacher and as a member of the literary community. And this happens too. An amazingly talented and humble young woman like Annella Thomas is honored by this wonderful group. She is supported. She's told that her work is good, that her writing matters. And that's enough for me to keep going. Confession. Annella's work matters. She matters. You matter. This matters. Thank you.
I think if we could all unmute ourselves and applaud. I'm not saying you have to, but okay, there go the hands. Thank you so much, Patty. I couldn't help but notice that your talk could actually become an essay with just a little bit of cutting and pasting. I mean, the form is there, the wisdom is there, the content is there. We got a chance to experience what goes on in the life and the mind of a teacher, of a student, and a writer. And I thank you so much. And I think we got some insight into what we're experiencing right now as well. So thank you. I need a little help with the questions. What's our process, Karen Baker, for taking questions? I see a few mics are unmuted.
If you have a question, you should unmute yourself and turn on your video and say your question and address it.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, I did bother to ask a few people ahead of time what they might want to ask so that we don't have to wait. So I wrote down, I think I'll ask the first question from myself though. So I know that you learned writing methodology through the story workshop method at Columbia. And this is a little more stylized than the Iowa method that you described. So I'm sorry, I lost myself here. So do you still teach this way is one question that I have. And does it still affect the way that you write, and how so?
Well, that's a really good question, Tammy. And just for a little context, some of you probably don't know what the story workshop approach to the teaching of writing is, but it's one that Tammy Bob, I always call her by her whole name. It's just such
Like a country singer, that's okay.
it's just such a great name. But it's the one that we sat in classes together learning about writing together through this methodology. And kind of at its core, what it is seeing your story. And this is primarily fiction, although it can move to nonfiction as well. It can also be adapted for poetry, but it's that idea of conceptualizing, seeing the story in your mind's eye, and then telling the story and listening to your voice as you tell the story, and then moving to the page and writing from there. So we would often do exercises, word games, where we would really be sort of in our heads, thinking about our story, seeing our story. And then we would do out loud oral tellings of things to get things going, to loosen it up, to hear our own voice. And then we would move to the writing from there. And we did in-class writing just about every single class time. So it was a very much process-based class. And we would read back our work to one another. So again, we have that sort of immediate spontaneous audience that I was talking about that's a little lacking in Zoom. It very much affects the way that I write. It's very scene driven, meaning putting people in the moment, you know, the awareness of sensory perceptions and place and all of those things. And I think if you read, you know, even my nonfiction, it's often story based, it's often narrative based, as opposed to just idea based. So it is very much a part of my own writing, but it's also, is it something that I still use? The principles of it are still essential to what I do. In the grad classes, there's the curriculum is slightly different from when you and I, Tammy, were students. And the students come with a certain expectation for the Iowa traditional workshop, that way of responding. So I'll often start my class with the first few weeks of doing process-based work, so seeing and telling and writing and experimenting, and then we'll get to looking at one another's work, sharing one another's work, and commenting on it later on in the semester, more so than we ever did when we were students. For new and for the undergrad students, particularly in fiction workshops and nonfiction workshops, very much so do I still rely on that word games and activities and seeing and telling. But it has evolved too, as I understand more about my own writing and about contemporary literature. You know, I'm always tweaking. Any teacher who stays in one place is not actually staying in one place, they're moving backwards. So I'm always thinking of new ways to kind of come at it. And it also has to evolve a little bit where our classes are shorter, so we don't have the time that we used to have. I know you and I would sit through those 4.5-hour long classes and crawl home at 11 o'clock at night, get up to go to work the next morning. They're 3-hour classes, which with breaks and time to change rooms, it really comes to like 2 hours and 45 minutes or so. So we can't accomplish quite as much. So there are things that I've had to streamline and to do in a way that seems more efficient and doesn't really allow the students as much depth and delve as I used to hope that they would get. And when I do the community workshops, because they're always shorter, you know, I kind of cut to the efficiency of it as much as I can. And online, it's almost impossible. You can imagine how hard it would be to do a word game that really works best when you're all sitting next to each other and do oral tellings to one another. So it is very much a part of my writing DNA and my teaching DNA, but it is not all that I do exactly the same way that you and I learned it.
Thank you.
That was a long answer. Sorry about that.
No, it wasn't. You didn't even answer the part about how it affects your own writing now, but that's fine. uh, okay, I see one question for Annella. Annella, can you unmute yourself? I always think that writers must have words swirling around in their head constantly. Do you find this is the case, and is it distracting?
For me, I don't really, I think the minute I sit down, it's like my thoughts are moving a lot faster than my fingers to be able to type it out or write it out. So for me, it's really not distracting, but it's kind of like finally I put myself in a space where I can like calm my body down, calm my mind down, and really just sort of sit with those words and try to arrange them in a way that starts to make sense. And I think at that point in time, it's like it's the best time for me to really like meditate on what it is that I want to write about, or like what's been plaguing my mind that, you know, needs to just be let out. But yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. This is, I don't see another question on the feed. Is there someone waiting to ask? Okay, then I have another one that I collected previously. Oh, did I miss someone? Okay.
Oh,
Patty, you write in various forms: fiction, travel writing, nonfiction, essays. Does your approach to these ways, I'm sorry, does your approach to these vary with the form? When you begin, like, do you have an end in mind? Do you know where you're going from the outset, or do surprises emerge once you get into a piece? Forgive me, my handwriting is horrible.
Surprises have to emerge, right? Who is it that said, you know, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, no surprises for the writer, no surprises for the reader. So they really do have to emerge. Answering the last part first. My fiction very often will start with an image, though, something that I've either seen or, you know, I observed or I remember or that kind of thing. So it'll start with a scene that makes me wonder about it, like, huh, what's going on there? And I wonder what that story is. And that will be the way that it starts. And then to some extent, the same for my nonfiction. My essays, although that sometimes also comes from once I've seen something, that an idea starts to form, you know, or a question starts to form from what I've seen. And so then I write some more toward the question, I think, than just trying to figure out the image. So those are those things. Travel writing always starts with, starts with travel. For me, I'm one of the, you know, not all travel writers are people who travel, but I like to be the feet on the ground kind of traveler. And then something that I carry back when I get to the writing of it, which is usually a couple of months later, like one particular image from that will start that piece for me. So it's often image-based one way or another. I never know how it's gonna end, or if I do, it becomes really pretty crummy. And if I do get to, I like Stuart Dybek had this advice about if you're writing and you can see the ending, then you might want to take a turn away from it to see what more you can discover, because that'll always be there. You can always come back to that thing you see, you know, but you might find something more engaging or more intriguing if you step away from it. And so if I get too close to the ending and start to recognize it too firmly, it starts to suck the life out of it. And so I need to turn away from the ending sometimes to figure out if there's something else that's better or more important or just more evocative.
Thank you so much. Okay, is there anyone else? I also have a question about running and writing. So I know that you were, I don't know if you still are a runner, but I know you've written about it. I think a lot of writers are runners as well. I've noticed many writers writing about running. Do you think there's a connection? And
I think there probably is. I think Lisa's a runner too, so she might. Aren't you a runner as well, Lisa? Don't you run?
I am not a runner. Pagine, our department chair, is a runner.
I think that, I mean, there can be, you know, especially if you do it without the headphones and without the noise in your ears, or walking. I'm more of a walker now because I've had a new hip put in, you know, and all of those things. Occasionally I trot a little bit, but I don't think you could call it running. But walking without headphones on, you know, just kind of that, there's a rhythm that happens. You allow yourself, your mind to free. It's kind of meditative for me. And I think it probably, maybe it was for you. And I think that it is for a lot of writers too. It just gives you a clear space to sort of sort things out and think about things. And the oxygen helps you think.
Didn't you once teach a writers and exercise class or something like this? Do I recall that?
Yeah, years ago, there was a class that I taught that was called The Writer's Body, which was, we incorporated a variety of things. We'd go to the playground and play. We had Tai Chi people come in, we had massage people, but then we would also do the research of writers who were engaged in physical pursuits, you know, and how we could see the evidence of that in their work, and also just see what the evidence of it was in our own work. So yeah, I did that for a while. It was fun.
Okay, so we'll take one last question, which is from Joan Gordon. I read lots of science fiction and fantasy, so there are ways in which that fiction escapes from the dictum to write what you know. Where do you stand on that?
I'm gonna ask Lisa first. Where do you stand on that? Maybe Annella, I'll let them weigh in on this.
Yes, I appreciate the question. I also read a lot of science fiction and fantasy. And I think the key in your phrasing is that there are ways in which that fiction does escape that dictum, but there are really, really important ways in which not even science fiction and fantasy does escape that necessity, which is to say that I find, and many writers find, that the strongest science fiction and fantasy is surprisingly grounded in the details of realism and the actual and the very particular, concrete, recognizably real elements of our world. And perhaps the imperative on sci-fi and fantasy writers is to do so is even more intense than for writers of, you know, realist naturalism, etc. Because they've got to make real and convincing the imaginative, speculative world that is being made, that's unfolding. So when I work with elements of sci-fi and fantasy, because I'm interested in the ways in which poets can learn from stories and narrative, and novelists as well, I really bring their attention to the surprising ways in which it's extremely based in realism, and that can be overlooked because of the dazzling, you know, imaginative world that's opening up. But just to like look super closely, you'll see how closely the best of those writers are looking at the real as well.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I don't really read too many science or fantasy works, but I do feel that the best ones, one of my favorite ones that I read many years ago was from Haruki Murakami's After Dark, which was like, this one was like very, very grounded in reality, but yet takes that unexpected turn into fantasy, which did not at all feel like confusing in a bad way. Didn't feel like it was, you know, hanging me on suspense for too long. It was just, I don't know how to explain the experience. It was so, it just grabbed me, and it's like I didn't care where it took me, so to speak. And I think it was because of that element of realism where you couldn't help but sort of go along with the characters as if, you know, they were just everyday figures that you will run into either way in real life. But I think just having that sort of, I think when writing, you kind of can't help but infuse some of yourself or something that you saw just on a random day, you know, into your writing. It's just, it helps ground you better in the story and helps you actually see it and actually feel it and actually kind of invokes those senses that I find to be very important in writing in general. Hopefully that answers the question.
And I think we're, on that note, we are going to wrap things up because we've pretty much gone over the time limit. So we don't really have a time limit, but I see people are leaving. So first of all, I want to thank the Columbia College delegation. I think you've provided a very informative and inspiring afternoon or hour for us. And I wish you all good fortune in the future, and thank you so much for spending this time with us. And for the members and Columbia people, if you like, I want to remind you that our next meeting is taking place on November 11th, which is the second Wednesday, not the third Wednesday. The reasons for that are Byzantine, and I won't go into them, but please put that on your calendar. Our speaker will be Rex Hupke from the Tribune. It'll be 1 week after the election, so we can hopefully laugh and cry a little bit. Hope we can laugh more. If you're familiar with Rex Hupke, he's one of the columnists, and he's often very silly, but arrives at the truth in this way. So that should be a fun time, I hope. So thank you again, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next month.